Montana mornings had a way of making the world seem peaceful, like nothing dark could possibly touch the sunlight streaming across the open fields. It was one of those mornings, clear blue sky, the air crisp, the distant mountains painted with gold, when Charles Carter pulled his black SUV up to the iron gates of Willow's Edge Park. The sun was still low, making the long grass sparkle with dew. Emily Carter sat quietly in the back seat, her small hands folded on the blanket that covered her legs. She was 7, with thick brown hair braided carefully by the housekeeper before dawn, and blue-gray eyes that had seen far too much for her age. Her wheelchair sat beside her, locked and ready for their special outing, as her father called it. But Emily's stomach twisted with a feeling she didn't have words for. Not excitement, not fear, but something hollow, as if something precious was about to be lost forever. Charles's voice was too cheerful as he unlatched the ramp and lifted her gently into her chair. He barely looked at her. For months he'd been distant, speaking in short, clipped sentences, always on the phone or whispering with Angela, his new wife. Emily had heard her name in those whispers, always with a sigh or a hiss. "Ready for our adventure, kiddo?" Charles asked, forcing a smile as he wheeled her toward the edge of the park. The gravel path wound through tall pines and wildflowers, the early morning quiet broken only by birds and the distant sound of a stream. Emily nodded, pressing her lips together. She wanted to ask where they were going, why her dad looked so tired, why Angela hadn't come, but she stayed silent. A single thought echoed in her mind. Something isn't right. Unseen by Charles, Max, Emily's German shepherd, crept along the tree line, paws silent in the grass. Max had sensed Emily's anxiety that morning, refusing to eat, refusing to let her out of his sight. He'd slipped out the back door as they left, following the SUV's scent all the way to the park. Now he moved like a shadow, never far behind. The path narrowed as they neared the cliff's edge. The view was breathtaking. Endless sky, the valley rolling out beneath them, the river shining far below. Charles paused, looking out over the expanse. For a moment, Emily thought he might tell her something important, something about her mother or why life had changed so much. Instead, he gripped the wheelchair's handles tighter. "Dad," Emily said softly, her voice barely carried over the wind. Charles knelt in front of her, his eyes distant, almost cold. "Emily, I need you to be brave, okay?" He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. She didn't understand, but every instinct screamed at her to get away, to run. But she couldn't run. Her legs hadn't worked since the accident last year, the one nobody talked about anymore, not since Angela had come. Charles stood, his face hardening. "Just look at the view for a minute, Em." She turned her head, trying to see what he saw, trying to understand. The wind picked up, rustling the grass, carrying with it a faint, familiar whine. Max, hidden just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. It happened in a blink. Charles's hands tightened on the chair. Emily felt the movement, the sudden momentum, and before she could even scream, the wheelchair lurched forward, rolling faster than she thought possible. The ground fell away. The world spun. "No, Dad, please, stop!" The scream tore from her throat, echoing out across the empty canyon. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. Emily saw the wildflowers, the cliff's jagged edge, her father's face, stone cold and unreadable. Then gravity seized her. The chair hit a bump, bounced, and careened toward the edge. In the brush, Max lunged, barking, a sound of pure panic. His paws scrambled for purchase, his teeth bared in desperate protest. But he was too far, too late. Emily's world became a blur of sky and terror. The chair tilted forward. Rocks scraped her hands as she tried to grab something, anything. Then, with a sickening jolt, the wheels caught on a jutting ledge, the momentum yanking her sideways. She hung there, the chair wedged against the cliff wall, legs dangling over the abyss, heart racing so hard she thought it would explode. Above her, the only sound was the wind and the frantic, heartbroken barks of Max. Emily clung to the arms of the chair, afraid to move, afraid even to breathe. Her father's footsteps retreated, gravel crunching under his shoes. She heard him pause, then sigh, a sound colder than the mountain air. And then, nothing. Max barked again, louder, more insistent. He darted to the edge, whining, searching for a way down. But there was none. Emily was alone, stranded, and the man she trusted most in the world had left her to die. Tears streamed down her face, cutting cold tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She whispered Max's name, her voice hoarse and small. Above, Max refused to leave, pacing and whining, his ears perked for any sign of hope. Minutes crawled by, then hours. The sun climbed higher, burning away the dew, turning the air hot and dry. Emily's arms ached from clinging to the chair. She tried to call out, but her throat was raw, her voice just a whisper lost on the wind. In that terrible silence, Emily thought of her mother, of warm hugs, of lullabies, of the promise that no matter what happened, she would always be loved. She closed her eyes, focusing on Max's presence, the only living soul who cared if she survived. And above, Max stood watch, unmoving, unyielding. No matter how much her father wanted Emily forgotten, Max would not let her go. The bond between girl and dog, forged in love and tested by betrayal, would not break so easily. As the sun dipped toward noon and the first shadows lengthened across the valley, the world held its breath, waiting to see if hope would outlast despair. The afternoon sunlight began to fade, slanting in sharp gold lines across the cliffside as thunderheads rolled in over the Montana plains. Emily's arms ached from holding onto the arms of her wheelchair, her fingers numb from gripping so tightly. Each time the wind gusted, the chair wobbled, the wheels scraping against the crumbling ledge. She barely breathed. Somewhere deep inside, fear tried to smother hope, whispering that she was utterly alone. But above, Max was relentless. The German shepherd darted back and forth along the rim, his paws kicking up dirt and stones, barking so fiercely his voice cracked. He could see Emily, a tiny, trembling shape just below him. Every few minutes, Max would rear up, putting his front paws on the edge, peering over as if sheer willpower could pull her back to safety. Down the trail, hidden from sight, Charles Carter strode briskly toward his SUV, his mind racing with excuses. His hands shook as he started the engine, sweat prickling beneath his crisp shirt. He had rehearsed this. He'd even planned the story. Emily had been accepted to a special camp for children with her condition, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a private program far away from home. Angela wouldn't question it. She had never wanted Emily around anyway. When he reached the mansion, Charles pulled himself together, practiced a smile in the rearview mirror, and entered through the kitchen door. Angela was already in the living room, her eyes sharp as knives. She barely glanced up from her phone. "Where's the brat?" she asked, arching a perfectly manicured eyebrow. Charles forced a casual shrug. "Dropped her off. The camp director seemed nice enough. They'll keep her busy. You can finally have some peace and quiet around here." Angela's lips curled. "Thank God. I'll call the cleaners in the morning. This place needs a fresh start." She didn't notice the slight tremor in his hands as he poured himself a whiskey. Meanwhile, in Emily's room, the staff quietly began their work. Angela's orders were clear. Pack away anything that reminded them of the girl. Dresses, photos, even Emily's well-loved stuffed rabbit found their way into black garbage bags. Angela watched with satisfaction as the room was stripped bare, every trace of Emily erased as if she had never existed. Back on the cliff, the wind picked up, carrying the first chill of the approaching storm. Emily blinked back tears, her teeth chattering, more from terror than cold. Her mind kept circling, replaying the morning, the drive, her father's strange silence, the sudden betrayal. She looked up, searching for Max, and found his eyes. They were wide, desperate, filled with the same fear and love she felt in her own heart. "Max, I'm here," she tried to call, but her voice was barely a whisper. She could only hope he could hear the longing in her heart, if not her words. The sky darkened. Far away, thunder rumbled. Max's barks became shriller, pleading, urgent. He paced in frantic circles, then shot off down the trail, desperate to find help. His nose worked overtime, searching for any scent that didn't belong, any sign of another human. As twilight set in, Jack Harper was closing the barn doors at the Carter estate. He was a big man, weathered and steady, with a deep sense of loyalty to the family, even if he never cared for Angela's sharp tongue. Jack paused, listening. Over the wind, he thought he heard barking. At first, he dismissed it. Coyotes weren't uncommon here. But there was something desperate in that sound, something familiar. He set down his tools and followed the noise up the hill, his boots crunching in the gravel. The barking grew louder, more frantic. When he broke through the trees and saw Max at the edge of the cliff, Jack's stomach dropped. The dog looked wild, foam at the corners of his mouth, tail stiff, body tense with agitation. "Easy, boy! What's wrong?" Jack called. Max whined, ran up to Jack, then darted back to the edge, repeating the motion, as if trying to pull Jack with him. Jack's eyes narrowed. He'd seen dogs act like this only when something was terribly, terribly wrong. "Emily!" Jack shouted down the ravine, but there was no answer, only the sound of the wind and distant thunder. He pulled out his phone, tried to call Charles, but got no answer. The first cold drops of rain began to fall. Jack returned to the ranch, Max at his heels, soaking wet and shaking with frustration. Linda, Jack's wife, met him at the door, her eyes full of questions. Jack shook his head, running a hand through his graying hair. "Emily's missing," he said, voice grim, "and Max is losing his mind. I'm calling the sheriff if I don't get some answers." Inside, Angela poured herself another glass of wine, humming as she made her way upstairs. She tossed Emily's photo albums into a cardboard box and shoved it into the back of the closet. Downstairs, Charles sat alone in his office, staring at the fire, the guilt crawling up his throat. Every sound, the creak of the house, the patter of rain, made him flinch. As the storm intensified, lightning split the sky, thunder booming so loud it shook the windows. Jack couldn't sleep. He kept pacing the kitchen, Max shadowing his every step, barking at every gust of wind. Finally, Jack grabbed his raincoat and flashlight. "I'm going back out," he told Linda. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." Linda nodded, pressing a thermos of coffee into his hand. "Be careful. Take Max. I'll call the sheriff if you're not back in an hour." Jack trudged through the rain, Max running ahead, barking at the darkness. Together they scoured the trails, calling Emily's name, searching for any clue. The rain washed away footprints, but Jack's gut told him to head toward the cliffs. At the edge, Max whined, sniffing the ground, his ears flat. Jack swept his flashlight over the drop, squinting through the sheets of rain. Then, there, a scrap of pink fabric snagged on a bush, fluttering in the wind. Jack's heart pounded. He recognized it. Emily's favorite scarf. He knelt, careful not to slip, and retrieved it, his hands shaking. "Hang on, Emily," he muttered into the night. "We're coming." On the ledge, Emily shivered uncontrollably, soaked to the bone. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face, heard his cold words. She tried to stay awake, to listen for Max, to believe that someone, anyone, would find her. Above, the storm raged on, and Max's howl split the night, a sound so raw and lonely that even the wild animals fell silent, as if bearing witness to the desperate love between a girl and her dog. And somewhere, in the gathering dark, hope flickered, thin as a thread, but unbroken. Night closed in around the Montana hills, draping the world in restless darkness. The storm, having spent its initial fury, left behind a drizzle that softened the edges of the landscape and muffled sound. Emily, perched on the narrow ledge, felt the rain seep through her clothes, chilling her skin. Each breath was shallow. Her arms trembled from exhaustion, her fingers raw and cramped from clinging to the wheelchair's frame. But above all, it was the loneliness, the absolute silence broken only by the distant bark of her loyal friend, that threatened to undo her spirit. Emily's mind wandered. She drifted through memories, her mother's soft humming while braiding her hair, the gentle squeeze of a hand when thunderstorms rolled in, the way Max would curl around her feet on cold nights. In her heart, she tried to summon the comfort of those moments, to remind herself that she wasn't truly alone, not while Max was still out there, calling her name in his own way. As another cold gust swept the cliffside, Emily closed her eyes and whispered into the night. "Max, I'm okay. I'm here. Don't leave me." She knew he couldn't understand the words, but she hoped he would hear the promise. She wasn't giving up, not yet. On the bluff above, Max had not moved from his post. Rain matted his fur and turned the dirt beneath his paws to mud, but he remained alert, eyes focused on the ledge below, ears twitching at every sound. He whimpered low, his voice hoarse from hours of barking, but he refused to leave. Whenever exhaustion threatened to overtake him, he thought of Emily, her laughter, her gentle hands, the way she smiled when he brought her favorite ball. He would not abandon her, no matter how long it took. Back at the Carter Ranch, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Jack Harper had returned soaked to the bone, clutching Emily's scarf like a lifeline. Linda met him at the door, worry etched deep into her features. Max, drenched and wild-eyed, bounded in behind Jack, barking as if to speak. Jack pressed the scarf into Linda's hands. "It was on the cliffside trail. She was there, Lynn. Something's happened." Linda swallowed, her eyes shining with tears. "The sheriff? I called. He said they'd send someone out as soon as the weather lets up." Jack ran a hand through his wet hair, frustration and fear warring in his chest. "But we can't wait. Emily's out there somewhere. Max knows it. I've never seen a dog act like this." They sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking away the long hours. Jack stared at the rain streaking the window, replaying the past days in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Emily's disappearance than a simple accident. He remembered the way Charles had avoided his questions that afternoon, the forced smile, the too eager talk about sending Emily away. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. Max paced between the door and the window, every muscle taut. When Linda brought him food, he ignored it. When Jack tried to coax him to his bed, Max only whined and scratched at the door, eyes pleading to go back out into the storm. It was as if Max's entire world had narrowed to a single goal: find Emily. Upstairs, Angela lay awake, nerves fraying with every tick of the clock. She kept glancing at her phone, waiting for a message from Charles, anything to reassure her that their secret was safe. But the silence gnawed at her, feeding her anxiety. She turned over, staring at the empty space where Emily's bed used to be, and shivered. Erasing the girl's presence from the house had not erased her memory. The shadows seemed longer tonight, every creak of the old house like a ghostly reproach. As the hours dragged on, Jack's worry deepened. He replayed his search of the cliff trail in his mind. Had he missed something? Could Emily have found shelter somewhere else? He glanced at Max, now curled up by the door, nose pressed against the glass, eyes bright even in the gloom. Suddenly, Linda broke the silence. "Jack, what if Charles lied? What if he didn't take Emily to a camp? What if—" She hesitated, afraid to voice the darker suspicion growing in her heart. Jack met her gaze, the truth settling heavy between them. "I don't trust him. I never have." He stood, grabbing his jacket again. "I'm going back out as soon as it's light. Maybe sooner if Max will show me the way." Linda reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Just come back to me, okay? And bring Emily home." As dawn began to lighten the horizon, the storm clouds finally broke, letting in the first pale rays of morning. Jack poured coffee into a thermos, clipped a flashlight to his belt, and whistled for Max, who shot to his feet, ready. Linda watched them disappear into the gray morning, whispering a prayer under her breath. Out on the cliff, Emily's mind drifted between sleep and waking. She imagined her mother's lullabies, the melody blending with the sound of rain on stone. She thought of Max, her lifeline above, and sent all her hope up to him, willing him to keep fighting. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she felt the thread between them, fragile but unbroken. Jack and Max moved quickly along the muddy trail, scanning the ground for any new clue. Max's nose worked furiously, sniffing at every bush and stone, every place Emily might have touched. When they reached the place where Jack had found the scarf, Max barked and began to circle, searching the air for Emily's scent. Suddenly, Max stopped, his ears sharp. He looked up at Jack, then toward the cliff's edge, whining insistently. Jack followed, shining his flashlight over the drop. For a long, terrifying moment, he saw nothing but rock and scrub. Then, as the light swept across a narrow outcropping, he saw it, a flash of blue, the shimmer of a wheelchair's wheel. "Emily!" Jack shouted, his voice trembling. "Hang on! We're coming!" Max barked, tail wagging furiously. His barks were louder now, desperate but hopeful, echoing through the canyon. Emily stirred, her mind struggling to process the sound. It wasn't just the wind. It was Max and someone else. Someone calling her name. She tried to call back, but her voice was too weak. She could only hope they had heard her. Jack turned back toward the ranch, heart pounding with adrenaline. "We need help," he muttered, already dialing his old friend Pete, the best mountain rescue volunteer in 3 counties. "Pete, it's Jack. It's Emily. She's alive. She's on the cliff. Bring everything you've got. We don't have much time." Back at the house, Linda threw open the door as Jack burst inside, breathless. "We found her. She's alive. She's hanging on the ledge. Call the sheriff. Call everyone. We need help." Hope, as thin and fragile as a child's whisper in the dark, bloomed suddenly bright in the Carter home. Max barked again, his eyes blazing with determination. He would not rest until Emily was safe in their arms once more, and somewhere, Clinging to the edge of the world, Emily felt the smallest spark of warmth, a promise that she was not forgotten, that love, once given, could never be erased. The Montana morning crept in gray and wet, transforming the world into a cold and unfamiliar place. On the cliffside, Emily Carter remained trapped on the narrow ledge, the metal of her wheelchair pressed against her side, her muscles aching and her lips cracked from the wind and rain. She'd spent the night fighting the darkness, not just the physical cold, but the much deeper shadow of betrayal and fear. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face as he let go of her chair, the sharp, deliberate coldness in his eyes. The memory hurt far more than her bruised arms or the cut on her cheek. Sometimes Emily drifted in and out of sleep. She would startle awake, heart hammering, convinced she was about to slip and fall. At other times, she clung to moments of hope, a distant sound of barking, the imagined feel of Max's warm fur, the memory of her mother's voice. She remembered the way her mother had held her after the accident that put her in the wheelchair, whispering gentle reassurances in the dark. Even now, Emily tried to call up those words, repeating them like a prayer. You are loved. You are not alone. Hold on. Above her, Max had never left his vigil. Even when fatigue threatened to pull him down, even as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds and glinted off his soaked fur, he remained on duty, standing sentry at the cliff's edge. Max whined and barked, his body tense with anxiety. When the wind shifted, he caught the faintest whiff of Emily's scent, and it was enough to renew his strength. For Max, time had no meaning. He would have stood there for eternity if it meant keeping Emily safe. Meanwhile, in the Carter mansion, the atmosphere was far from hopeful. Angela Carter stood in the hallway, her arms full of Emily's old books and stuffed animals. She moved through the house like a storm herself, shoving memories of Emily into garbage bags, ordering the staff to scrub the little girl's presence from every corner. The more she erased, the lighter she felt, like removing a stain from her perfect life. She didn't see the way the housekeeper's eyes filled with pity or the way the gardener averted his gaze. In Charles Carter's private office, the man himself sat hunched over his desk, burning through a stack of paperwork. He lit page after page from the corner, watching Emily's birth certificate, trust fund records, and adoption documents curl and blacken in the fire. He poured himself another drink, hands shaking slightly. No one could connect him to Emily's money now, he told himself. No one could prove what had really happened. But even as the documents turned to ash, guilt gnawed at his insides. Back at the ranch, Jack and Linda Harper tried to piece together the nightmare that had upended their lives. Jack stood by the window, cup of black coffee forgotten in his hands, staring at the hills as if he could will Emily back to safety. Linda sat at the table, head in her hands, the phone within arm's reach. She'd spent most of the night calling the sheriff, search and rescue, even the nearest hospitals, praying for any news. Every time the phone rang, her heart skipped with hope, only to be crushed by disappointment. Jack's mind ran in circles. He replayed the previous day in slow motion. The barking, Max's panic, the scarf fluttering in the wind. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that this was no accident. Charles lied to us, Linda, he muttered. I know he did. That poor girl. What she must be going through. Linda reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched Jack's arm. She's strong, Jack. If anyone can hold on, it's Emily. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. We have to believe in her, and in Max. That dog won't quit until she's safe. In the kitchen, Max's bowl of food sat untouched, the water level unmoved. The German shepherd was outside again, barking and howling, refusing the comfort of the warm barn. His devotion became the talk of the staff. Some even began to pray for Emily, lighting candles on the kitchen windowsill. Hope and dread warred inside every heart on the ranch. On the cliff, Emily tried to distract herself from her fear. She hummed one of her mother's lullabies, a shaky melody that danced in the cold air. She thought about the days before Angela came, about laughter and pancakes on Saturday mornings, about how Max would rest his head on her lap and beg for bites of her breakfast. Those memories were lifelines, tiny anchors that kept her from slipping into despair. But sometimes the fear overwhelmed her. Her stomach twisted with hunger and thirst. The wind stung her cheeks, and her hands were so cold she could barely feel them. She tried to stay awake, counting the seconds between Max's barks. She listened for Jack's voice, or anyone's, hoping they would come soon. At the same time, Jack and Linda pored over every clue they had. Jack made a map of the area, marking every spot Max had stopped and sniffed the night before. Linda coordinated with the sheriff, who promised to send a rescue team at first light. The Harpers kept themselves moving, believing that if they just kept searching, they might bring Emily home. As the day wore on, the house filled with a quiet tension. Angela raged at the staff, ordering them to work faster, while Charles sat in his office drinking in the gloom. Outside, hope smoldered like an ember, kept alive by the faith of a little girl, the determination of two old ranchers, and the loyalty of a dog who simply refused to give up. When the sun finally broke through the clouds and cast a weak light over the valley, it found Emily still clinging to the ledge. She had not given up, and neither had Max. Through the long hours of suffering, they held on, one by the strength of her memory and courage, the other by sheer devotion. In that moment, hope proved itself stronger than despair. Emily closed her eyes, listening to Max's howl echoing over the canyon, and knew deep down that someone was coming. She would not be lost forever. Her story was not over. Dawn broke cold and wild over the Montana hills. The sky churned with the last storm clouds from the night before. On the edge of the cliff, Max stood shivering but resolute, his bark growing hoarse from hours of calling into the void. Down below, Emily barely clung to consciousness. Her lips were blue, her eyes half shut, but she refused to let go of the armrests. Each time her grip faltered, she pictured Max's eyes, full of love and worry. And that memory was enough to tighten her hands and pull herself back from the edge of sleep. At the Carter Ranch, the house was a flurry of movement. Jack Harper had been up since before dawn, pacing by the window, phone pressed to his ear. "We found her, Pete. She's alive. She's on the ledge below the ridge. We need you out here now. Ropes, harnesses, the works. The girl's hanging on by a miracle." Pete McKinley, a wiry, sunburned man with a gray beard and a voice like gravel, was already pulling his rescue gear from his old pickup by the time Jack hung up. He called the local sheriff's department, gave them coordinates, then tore up the gravel driveway to the Carter estate. Word spread fast. By the time Pete arrived, several deputies, the county EMT, and a couple of neighbors had gathered in the drive, braced against the biting wind. Jack greeted Pete with a brisk handshake, his face drawn with worry and hope. Max circled them, barking furiously, then bolting down the path, then back again, herding the men with an urgency no one could ignore. "He's been up there all night," Jack explained, voice rough. "Hasn't left the spot once. If we're going to find her, we follow Max." They set off as a group, Jack, Pete, the sheriff, and 2 rescue volunteers, carrying packs of climbing gear and medical supplies. Max led the way, stopping every few yards to look back, eyes pleading, "Hurry!" As they reached the cliff's edge, The scene was even more desperate than Jack remembered. The ledge where Emily's chair was lodged was barely wide enough for a bird to land, let alone hold a child and a wheelchair. The drop below seemed endless, the rocks gleaming slick with last night's rain. Pete surveyed the cliff, sizing up the danger. It's going to be tight. Storm softened up the ground. Mud could give at any time. He locked eyes with Jack. We do this by the book, no mistakes. Jack nodded. He looked down at Emily, heart hammering. She was pale, barely moving, but when he called her name, her head turned the smallest fraction. Max barked louder, dancing at the edge as if willing her to hang on. Pete wasted no time. He harnessed himself to the strongest pine nearby, clipped in his ropes, and double-checked every knot. Jack held the other end, hands trembling but strong, while the sheriff shone a flashlight down to mark Emily's location. The sky rumbled, thunder rolling in the distance. Rain began to fall again. Just a light mist, but it was enough to turn the earth slick. Pete took a deep breath, then swung over the edge, lowering himself hand over hand, boots searching for purchase on the jagged face. Above, Max went wild, barking, whining, spinning in circles. It was as if he understood every move Pete made, and with each step closer to Emily, his barks turned from panic to encouragement. The rescue took every ounce of skill Pete had. The rocks crumbled under his feet. At one point, a stone the size of a fist broke loose and tumbled past Emily, bouncing off her wheelchair with a sickening clang. Emily whimpered, but her eyes stayed locked on Pete. "Hang in there, kiddo," Pete called, voice steady and calm. "I'm almost to you. You're doing great. Just a little longer, all right?" Above, Jack knelt by the edge, whispering prayers, knuckles white on the rope. Max pressed close to him, eyes never leaving Emily. When Pete finally reached the ledge, he braced himself against the rock and spoke gently to Emily, checking her for injuries. Her hands were nearly frozen to the chair, and her lips trembled as she tried to answer. "Don't move, sweetheart. I've got you." Pete slid a harness around her torso, buckled her in, and checked the straps twice. With infinite care, he secured her chair to the rope as well, not wanting to risk another slip. All the while, Max barked from above, a frantic soundtrack of hope. The worst moment came when Pete began the climb up, Emily suspended between sky and earth. The wheelchair jerked, the ledge crumbled, and for one terrifying instant, it seemed everything would fall away. Jack cried out. Max howled, but Pete gritted his teeth and pulled, inch by inch, until Emily was within reach of Jack's outstretched arms. Jack's tears streamed down his face as he wrapped Emily in his old ranch coat, whispering, "You're safe now, honey. You're safe." Max leapt at them, tail wagging so hard he nearly knocked Jack over, licking Emily's hands and face, whining with relief and joy. The sheriff radioed for the waiting EMTs, who rushed in with blankets and oxygen. They lifted Emily gently onto a stretcher, checking her vitals, covering her with warm, dry coats. Jack never let go of her hand, his voice steady even as he shook. Pete climbed up last, muddy and spent, grinning with exhaustion. "You've got yourself a tough little girl," he told Jack, clapping him on the shoulder. Linda arrived at the scene, out of breath and weeping, falling to her knees beside Emily. "Thank you, God. Thank you." She stroked Emily's hair, pressing her forehead to the child's, whispering the words every child longs to hear. "We're here, we're not going anywhere." Max sat down by the stretcher, never taking his eyes off Emily. For a long moment, as the medics worked and the rescue team packed up, the bond between girl and dog was unbreakable, a living testament to loyalty, to hope, to the refusal to surrender to despair. Back at the Carter mansion, Charles and Angela watched from the window as the emergency vehicles sped up the drive. Angela's lips pressed into a thin line. Charles turned away, face pale and drawn. The house, once silent, buzzed with the news. Emily had survived. Against all odds, she had been found. And soon, the truth about what happened would begin to unravel. But for now, on the windswept cliff, as the sun finally broke through the clouds, Emily was safe in the arms of those who truly loved her. Max nuzzled her hand, tail thumping gently. Emily smiled, small, weak, but alive. In that moment, surrounded by friends and loyal companions, hope was no longer just a wish. It was a promise, a new beginning. The sirens faded into the distance as the ambulance carrying Emily raced toward the hospital, Linda clutching her hand and whispering soothing words. Max was allowed to climb in beside her, refusing to leave her side. Every time Emily's eyelids fluttered, she would find Max's worried brown eyes and his big head resting gently on her lap, his warm presence a comfort against the chill that still clung to her bones. Back at the Carter estate, the mood had turned sour. Charles Carter paced his office, the remnants of burned paperwork smoldering in the fireplace. He poured himself another whiskey, hand shaking so badly he spilled a splash on the floor. Angela hovered in the kitchen, watching the driveway with wide, frantic eyes. She snapped at the housekeeper, barked orders at the gardener, her veneer of control crumbling as the tension mounted. The staff whispered in the hallways, eyes darting from Angela to the window, afraid of what would happen next. In the hospital, doctors and nurses swarmed Emily, working to bring warmth and color back to her cheeks. Linda hovered over every procedure, refusing to be sent home. Max never left Emily's bedside, curling up on the floor, one paw always touching her wheelchair. Nurses smiled at the sight. This bedraggled, loyal dog refusing food, water, even a warm bed in the waiting area unless it meant staying close to his girl. As the doctors stabilized Emily, Jack made a call he had been dreading. He dialed Sheriff Barlow, the seasoned local lawman who had known the Carters for years, and told him everything. Every suspicion, every detail about Charles's coldness, Angela's campaign to erase Emily, the evidence of burned documents and hurried lies. Linda backed up Jack's story, her voice trembling with anger and fear as she described Angela's obsession with getting rid of Emily's belongings, and the staff's sudden orders to forget the little girl even existed. Sheriff Barlow listened in silence, the gravity of the situation settling over him. "I'm sending a unit out now," he promised. "No more secrets, Jack. You've done the right thing." By mid-morning, flashing lights announced the arrival of 2 sheriff's cars at the Carter mansion. Deputies moved with quiet purpose, securing the scene as Barlow marched to the door. Charles opened it, face pale and jaw set. Angela stood behind him, clutching her robe tight, her eyes wild and darting. "We need to talk, Charles," Barlow said, his voice flat as a hammer. "Now." Charles tried to bluster, but his words were brittle. "This is a mistake, Sheriff. My daughter, she's sick, you know. Always causing trouble, running off. Save it. I want you and Angela in the living room. We have questions, and we expect answers. Right now." Angela's composure broke first. The moment she realized police were inside the house, she began to stammer, to contradict herself. The deputies quickly separated her from Charles, and within minutes, she was sobbing into her hands, swearing she never wanted any of this and that it was all Charles's idea. The staff, previously silent, stepped forward one by one. The housekeeper described Angela's furious campaign to pack up Emily's life. The gardener mentioned the strange hush that had fallen since Emily's disappearance. Jack and Linda's testimony filled in the gaps, as did the search and rescue team's report from the cliffside. Emily's chair, the impossible fall, the improbability of her surviving by accident. Sheriff Barlow pressed Charles, who grew red-faced and silent, jaw working, sweat beading at his brow. "You tried to erase your daughter, Charles. You tried to erase a little girl for money, and you failed." As deputies searched the house, they found the last of the half-burned paperwork and the contents of Emily's room, boxed, labeled, and ready to be thrown away. Angela broke down completely, spilling everything about Charles's plan, the trust fund, the staged special camp story, the hope that Emily would simply vanish and never return. News spread quickly through the community. The story of Emily's miraculous rescue and the suspicious circumstances made its way into the local press. People who had known the Carters for years shook their heads, unable to believe the depths of betrayal. At the hospital, Emily was stable but exhausted. The trauma had left her shaken, jumpy at every sound. Linda sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering promises that she would never be left alone again. Max, always close, pressed his head into Emily's lap, licking her fingers as if reassuring her that the worst was over. Doctors said Emily would recover with rest and care. Jack and Linda began the process of petitioning for temporary guardianship, determined to keep Emily safe from Charles and Angela, whose arrests made headlines across the county. When the sheriff visited the hospital, he knelt by Emily's bed, hat in hand. "You're a brave kid," he told her, his voice warm. "What you've been through, it takes guts to survive that. And you did. You and that dog of yours." Emily managed a weak smile. "Max saved me." "He sure did. The whole town's talking about him. I reckon he's a hero." Linda stroked Emily's hair. "You're safe now, honey. You're with us." Outside, the community rallied in a way no one expected. Word spread of Emily's ordeal, and donations of clothes, books, and even toys flooded the hospital. Volunteers organized therapy dogs to visit, hoping to bring comfort to Emily and other children like her. Jack and Linda were offered support from every corner. Neighbors dropped off home-cooked meals, while local businesses raised funds for Emily's care. The sheriff's office continued their investigation, finding more evidence of Charles's motive. Bank records, emails with lawyers, even voice recordings Angela had saved on her phone in case Charles turned on her. The evidence piled up, and within days, both Charles and Angela were formally charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. Max's loyalty and bravery became a local legend. Reporters arrived at the hospital, eager for photos of the dog who refused to abandon his girl. One newspaper ran the headline, "Hero Dog Saves Girl, Brings Down Greedy Father." The story swept through social media, inspiring strangers across the country. But inside Emily's room, none of the outside noise mattered. The only thing that mattered was safety. Linda's gentle hands, Jack's steady presence, and Max's warm fur pressed close. For the first time in weeks, Emily slept deeply, free from fear, knowing she was finally surrounded by people who would never let her go. And so, with truth finally revealed and justice looming, a broken family began to heal, and a little girl found hope in the steadfast loyalty of the people and the dog, who refused to give up on her. The first days after her rescue blurred together in a gentle haze for Emily Carter. The sterile white of the hospital room was softened by the constant presence of Linda, Jack, and, most importantly, Max. The German Shepherd remained steadfast by her side, refusing to leave even when nurses tried to tempt him with treats or coax him to the waiting area. The staff quickly learned, if Emily woke from a nightmare, it was Max's soft nuzzle and big brown eyes that calmed her fastest. Emily's body slowly mended. Bruises faded, The swelling in her hands eased, and color returned to her cheeks. The pain in her arms and legs, the chill in her bones, all receded with time and care. But some wounds went deeper. Sleep brought terrors. The sensation of falling, her father's hard eyes, the memory of being so desperately alone in the dark. Sometimes she would wake in a panic, hands clutching the bedsheets, and Max would be there in an instant, licking her fingers, grounding her in the present. Jack and Linda divided their days between the hospital and the courthouse. With the help of sympathetic lawyers, they petitioned for emergency guardianship of Emily. The paperwork was thick and the process stressful, but neither wavered. They answered questions, gave statements, and spent long hours reassuring Emily that they weren't going anywhere, no matter what the judge decided. Meanwhile, the story of Emily and Max touched the hearts of people far beyond Montana. Letters began arriving at the hospital from across the state, then the country. School children sent hand-drawn cards. Local churches and businesses organized meal trains and collected donations for Emily's recovery. The hospital bulletin board overflowed with messages of hope, stuffed animals, and bright balloons. For the first time since her mother died, Emily felt herself surrounded by love, unexpected, overwhelming, and healing. But it was Max's presence that changed everything. At first, doctors hesitated to let him stay in the room, but Emily's panic attacks eased whenever Max was there. Eventually, they allowed him to sleep on a blanket next to her bed. He became her therapy dog in spirit long before it was official. Max learned to press his nose into Emily's hand when she trembled, to hop gently onto the mattress and curl beside her when nightmares woke her. Nurses marveled at his intuition. Even the hardest days felt softer when Max was near. Linda, for her part, took to reading aloud in the evenings, sometimes stories from Emily's childhood, sometimes the latest news about the sheriff's investigation, sometimes letters from strangers who had heard about Max and wanted to help. Jack brought stories from the ranch, promising Emily that the horses missed her, and that Linda's cinnamon rolls were waiting the moment she came home. The hospital room filled with the warmth of laughter, the comfort of routine, and the hopeful chaos of new beginnings. As the days passed, Emily's fears slowly loosened their grip. Therapy dogs visited, and she met other children struggling with fear and pain of their own. Together they drew pictures, played games, and whispered secrets in the quiet afternoons. Emily told them about Max, how he'd saved her life, how he never gave up. She watched as their eyes widened with wonder, and she felt a flicker of pride for the first time in months. Jack and Linda became her anchor. Though not her parents by blood, they offered the gentle security she'd missed for so long. Jack was patient, never pushing Emily to talk about what happened, only reminding her that he was proud of her courage. Linda brought comfort in small ways. Soft pajamas, home-cooked meals snuck into the hospital, endless patience on the hardest days. As the sheriff's investigation deepened, more details emerged. Charles had forged signatures and moved large sums from Emily's trust, manipulated legal documents, and even drafted emails posing as Emily's mother to cover his tracks. Angela's greed had fueled his worst impulses, but she quickly folded under questioning, trading her silence for a lighter sentence. In the end, the evidence was overwhelming, and both were denied bail. The community, once divided by whispers and gossip, now stood firmly behind Emily. One bright afternoon, the hospital organized a small ceremony to honor Max. The sheriff himself arrived, pinning a bright blue ribbon on Max's collar and reading a proclamation declaring him an official therapy and support dog for Emily. News cameras captured the moment, and Emily beamed as Max barked, tail wagging, clearly delighted by the attention and treats. The video quickly went viral, and soon animal shelters, therapy dog organizations, and even strangers from across the country reached out to support Emily and Max. With Jack and Linda as her temporary guardians, Emily's life found a new, gentle rhythm. She spent her afternoons in therapy, both physical and emotional, always with Max at her side. She made slow but steady progress, learning to trust again, finding small joys in daily victories. The hospital staff watched with amazement as the little girl who had once been paralyzed by fear began to open up, smiling, joking, even helping new arrivals adjust to the hospital routine. The community's support never wavered. Donations covered medical expenses. Therapy dogs came to visit children throughout the hospital, inspired by Max's story. Cards and letters arrived daily, so many that Emily and Linda started a scrapbook to keep track. The sense of connection, of being part of something larger, gave Emily hope on the days when memories threatened to overwhelm her. The sheriff's office prepared for the upcoming trial, gathering more evidence of Charles's motives and Angela's involvement. The case drew national attention, reporters flocking to the small Montana town to cover every new detail. But for Emily, the world shrank to the size of her hospital room, her new family, and the dog who had saved her life. Jack and Linda began to dream of a future together. They spoke quietly about adopting Emily, about buying a house with a big backyard where Max could run and Emily could play safely. The future, once so uncertain, now shimmered with possibility. And through it all, Max remained a constant, a silent guardian, a source of joy and healing. Every day, he reminded Emily that love could outlast the darkest betrayal and that, together, they could face whatever came next. The morning of the trial dawned with a kind of electric anticipation that buzzed throughout the small Montana town. Outside the courthouse, reporters milled about, their vans clustered near the steps, cameras pointed toward the entrance. Locals, too, had gathered, some curious, some angry, all invested in the fate of the Carter family. It seemed the whole county was holding its breath, waiting to see whether justice would finally be served for Emily and the little girl, whose courage had become a symbol of hope for so many. Emily, wearing her favorite yellow sweater and holding Max's leash in one trembling hand, watched the crowds through the courthouse window. Her new guardians, Jack and Linda, sat on either side, radiating steady, reassuring calm. Linda squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens today, we're here. You're not alone. Not anymore." Max, dressed in a blue vest that read Therapy Dog Official, sat upright at Emily's side, eyes bright and focused. He seemed to sense the importance of the moment, never straying more than an inch from her wheelchair. The courtroom itself was packed. Community members, court officials, even a handful of strangers who had followed Emily's story on the news. The judge, a tall woman with silver hair and a steady gaze, took her seat, and the trial began. The prosecution wasted no time. Photos of the cliff, records of Charles's bank transactions, and the contents of the burned documents were all entered into evidence. Testimonies from staff and neighbors painted a clear picture of the months leading up to Emily's disappearance. The cold indifference, the whispered arguments, the hurried packing away of her things. Angela, pale and withdrawn, sat hunched at the defense table, her eyes darting nervously. Charles maintained a rigid posture, jaw clenched, but even from a distance Emily could see the cracks in his armor. Then came the hardest part. Emily was called to testify. For a moment, the world shrank to the width of the courtroom aisle. Max nudged her hand, grounding her. With Jack and Linda's encouraging smiles, she wheeled herself to the witness stand, head held high. The prosecutor's voice was gentle. "Emily, do you remember what happened that morning at the park?" Emily took a shaky breath. "Yes. My father. He pushed me. He pushed my wheelchair toward the edge. The room was so silent, she could hear Max's breathing." "And what did you do?" "I begged him to stop. I asked him why. He just let go." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on, eyes fixed on the judge. "If it wasn't for Max, I think I would have given up. But he stayed with me, and he barked until help came." There were tears in the courtroom, quiet sniffles muffled behind hands. Even the judge blinked hard, composing herself before continuing. The defense tried to poke holes in Emily's story, painting Charles as a concerned but overwhelmed parent. But their efforts faltered against the mountain of evidence and the testimony of so many who had witnessed his coldness. Angela, for her part, confessed fully to her role, her resentment, her desire to erase Emily from their lives, her willingness to go along with Charles's plan for the promise of an inheritance. When the trial was over, the jury returned with their verdict in less than an hour. Charles and Angela were found guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. The judge's gavel came down with finality. Both would lose all parental rights and spend years behind bars. Emily's estate and trust were awarded to her new guardians, Jack and Linda, with court orders to ensure her continued safety and happiness. As the courtroom emptied, the sheriff approached Emily and knelt beside her. "You did it, kid," he said with a proud grin. "You stood up to them, and you showed this whole town what courage looks like." Reporters clamored for a quote, but Emily just smiled shyly, hugging Max's neck as he wagged his tail and licked her cheek. To the world, he was a hero, but to her, he was simply her best friend, the dog who had never left her side. The next weeks passed in a whirlwind of change. Jack and Linda's petition for adoption was granted in record time. The town threw a celebration, neighbors and friends packing the little church hall to welcome Emily and Max home. Someone brought a cake shaped like a German shepherd, and the mayor presented Max with a big, shiny collar tag that read, "Hero Dog." Moving day came with sunshine and laughter. Jack and Linda had found a cozy house on the edge of town, a place with wide doors for Emily's wheelchair and a sprawling backyard for Max to run. Emily's new room was painted a cheerful sky blue, her shelves quickly filled with books, cards, and mementos from the community. In the backyard, Jack built a ramp and a flower garden, and Linda set up a cozy reading nook where Emily could watch Max chase butterflies through the tall grass. For the first time in her life, Emily felt safe. Each morning, she woke to the sound of Max's happy bark and the scent of pancakes drifting from the kitchen. She found herself laughing more, trusting more, letting go of the nightmares that had haunted her for so long. The town continued to rally around them. Volunteers helped build a fence so Max could run safely. Therapy dogs visited to play with Emily and other neighborhood kids. At school, Emily was welcomed warmly, her story inspiring kindness and understanding among students and teachers alike. Court records officially named Max as her support animal, granting him a badge and access to go everywhere Emily went. He attended school with her, lay quietly during lessons, and joined in games at recess. The other children quickly accepted Max as one of their own. He was as much a part of the community as Emily was. As the seasons changed, so did Emily's world. She grew stronger, more confident, taking on challenges that would have seemed impossible before. She learned to speak up for herself, to reach out to new friends, to trust the love of her new family. And always, Max was there, her protector, her comfort, her reminder that hope could survive even the darkest betrayal. In the end, justice wasn't just served in the courtroom. It blossomed in the lives of everyone touched by Emily's story. The girl who had once been left for dead on a lonely cliff had become a symbol of resilience, her journey proving that family could be chosen, that love could heal, and that heroes sometimes come on 4 legs and a wagging tail. The days after the trial passed like a quiet dream for Emily, a world away from the courtroom's chaos, the flashing cameras, and the endless retelling of her ordeal. Safe at last in her new home with Jack, Linda, and Max, she felt both lighter and heavier than before. The weight of fear and survival slowly slid from her shoulders, replaced by a different kind of burden. The challenge of healing, of learning to trust, and of finding her place in a world that had for a while seemed so hostile. Some scars were easy to see, the bruises, the fading scratches, but others were hidden deep. Emily woke most nights tangled in sheets, heart racing from nightmares. Sometimes she dreamt of falling, the sudden jolt, the wind whipping her hair, the sense of utter helplessness as the cliffside yawned beneath her. Other times, she heard her father's voice, cold and distant, or Angela's sharp laugh echoing through dark corridors. Each morning, Max would be waiting at her bedside, tail thumping, pressing his nose to her hand until she could breathe again. Jack and Linda never pressed her to talk about the dreams. They simply sat with her in the quiet, offering their steady presence. School brought its own set of challenges. When Emily returned, she was greeted at first with hesitant stares and whispers in the hallways. Kids wondering, perhaps, if she was fragile, if she might break. Some were curious, others nervous, a few even a little cruel. But Emily had changed. The trial had made her braver, and Max's loyalty gave her strength. When kids asked about the dog who never left her side, she smiled and told them about the cliff, about how Max had barked until help came, about how sometimes the smallest voice, human or canine, could save a life. Even so, it wasn't always easy. Some days, Emily withdrew, sitting by herself at lunch, staring at her hands. She felt guilt for surviving, anger at her father, even confusion at the kindness that now surrounded her. On her worst days, she questioned if she would ever feel whole again. Max understood those moments better than anyone. He'd nudge her hand, rest his head on her knees, and simply be there. His presence was wordless comfort, a promise that she was never truly alone. Jack and Linda did their best to give Emily the safe, loving home she had always needed. Their routines became anchors, family breakfasts in the bright kitchen, evenings in the garden watching the sun sink behind the hills, weekends at the local farmer's market. Linda baked pies with Emily, letting her knead dough with flour-dusted hands. Jack took her to see the horses at the old ranch, showing her how to feed them sugar cubes from her palm, how to brush their manes and whisper gentle words to calm them. But healing wasn't linear. Some afternoons, Emily would roll her chair out to the backyard and just sit in silence. Max pressed close beside her. She watched other families laughing on the street, wondered about the mother she barely remembered, and let the tears come when no one was watching. Sometimes Jack joined her, sitting nearby without a word, letting the quiet speak for itself. It was in these moments that Emily realized something important. Real healing was slow, filled with setbacks and small triumphs, and it wasn't something she had to do alone. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted through the yard, Emily sat on the porch with Max curled at her feet. Jack came out, lowering himself onto the step beside her. He didn't ask questions or try to fill the silence. Instead, he shared stories from his own childhood. How he'd lost his father young, how lonely he'd felt some days, how much comfort he'd found in the company of a stray dog who had wandered onto the ranch one winter and never left. The story surprised Emily, making her realize that even grown-ups carried invisible wounds. It made her feel a little less alone. That night, as the three of them gathered at the dinner table, Emily voiced an idea that had been growing quietly inside her. I want to help other kids like me, ones who feel different, or scared, or hurt. Maybe Max and I could visit the hospital, or start something for kids and dogs to help each other." Jack's eyes shone with pride, and Linda's hand squeezed hers. "That's a beautiful idea, honey. Max is a healer, and so are you. We'll help you however we can." Inspired by her own recovery and the bond she shared with Max, Emily began to dream big. With Jack and Linda's encouragement, they reached out to local shelters and children's counselors. Soon, Emily was volunteering as a peer mentor, sitting with new arrivals at the hospital and sharing her story. Max, now a certified therapy dog, became a gentle giant to frightened children, offering comfort and playful companionship. Emily found that every time she helped someone else, a little bit of her own pain faded. The project grew quickly. With the community's help, Jack and Linda helped Emily launch the German Shepherd Healing Center, a place where kids and therapy dogs could recover together. Children who'd suffered loss or trauma found friendship, understanding, and hope in the company of loyal German shepherds like Max. Emily became a leader, sometimes quiet and watchful, sometimes bold and encouraging, always ready to share her experience or lend a listening ear. Through the center, Emily discovered her own resilience. She learned that family could be chosen and built, not just inherited. She saw how the unconditional love of an animal could reach places even words could not. And she realized that pain, when met with compassion, could become the seed of something hopeful and new. Some nights, the old fears still crept in. Emily would wake, breathless, eyes wide in the darkness. But now, when she reached for comfort, she found it in the warmth of her new family, in the quiet strength of Max, and in the laughter of children learning to trust again. Jack often told her, "Healing isn't a race, Emily. It's a journey, and you've already come farther than most people ever will." And as Emily watched the sun rise over the center's fields, dogs and children playing together on the grass, she believed it. The lessons of loyalty, love, and courage that she and Max had learned on that terrible night had become the foundation for a new life, a legacy of hope that would outlast every shadow of the past. 1 year had passed since the day Emily Carter's life changed forever. The sharp chill of that Montana morning, the terror of the cliffside, and the searing betrayal had faded, replaced by a new kind of memory, a patchwork of healing, hope, and the warmth of a community that had learned how to rally around one small girl and her steadfast dog. The German Shepherd Healing Center, built on land donated by grateful townsfolk, had become a vibrant heartbeat in the community. Laughter and barking now echoed where once there was only silence and pain. On a bright summer afternoon, the center buzzed with excitement. Children and dogs played together in the fenced yard, running through sprinklers, tossing tennis balls, and laughing so hard their voices rang above the birdsong. Emily, now a year older and stronger in both body and spirit, sat beneath the old cottonwood tree that marked the heart of the garden. Max, ever her shadow, lay at her side, tail thumping contentedly as he watched the chaos with wise brown eyes. Jack and Linda stood nearby, beaming with pride. Their adoption of Emily had become official that spring, turning 3 hearts and 1 loyal dog into a real family. Their house was no longer just a safe haven. It was home, filled with photos of Emily and Max, walls papered with thank you cards from children who had found peace and friendship at the center. Today marked the first anniversary of Emily's rescue, and the whole community had come out to celebrate. Volunteers set up tables laden with food, local musicians played cheerful tunes, and kids painted Max's portrait on everything from rocks to t-shirts. The mayor, in a suit slightly too warm for the weather, gave a short speech about resilience and the power of kindness. But everyone knew the real reason they were there: to honor the extraordinary courage of Emily and the extraordinary loyalty of her dog. As the festivities quieted, Linda gently wheeled Emily to the makeshift stage set up beneath the cottonwood's shade. The crowd hushed as Emily took the microphone, Max sitting upright at her feet, wearing his shiny hero dog collar tag. Emily's voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she spoke. "A year ago, I was scared and alone. I thought I'd lost everything: my mom, my home, my trust in the world. But Max never gave up on me. He showed me what loyalty really means." She paused, looking down at her dog, then back up at the faces in the crowd. "Because of Max, because of Jack and Linda, because all of you believed in me, I found a new family. I found hope again. And I learned that you can't always choose what happens to you, but you can choose how you respond. You can choose to keep loving, to keep trusting, to help others heal, too." Applause rippled through the crowd, some wiping away tears. Emily smiled, a real bright smile that reached her eyes. She continued, "Forgiveness isn't easy. For a long time I thought I had to stay angry to protect myself. But I realized forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about letting go of the pain and not letting it control you anymore. My father and Angela can't hurt me now, because I've chosen to move forward. I've chosen to forgive, not for them, but for me." The audience stood, clapping even louder now. Max barked joyfully, as if sensing his girl's pride, and Emily leaned down to hug him close. After the speeches, the real celebration began. Emily joined the other children in games, cheering for her friends as they navigated obstacle courses with their therapy dogs. The local news team filmed Max leading a pack of puppies through the yard, his tail a proud banner. Linda handed out homemade lemonade and slices of cake, and Jack manned the grill, flipping burgers for hungry kids and volunteers. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Emily wandered to the edge of the garden, where the center's newest arrivals, a litter of rescued German Shepherd puppies, tumbled over each other in the grass. She watched as a shy little girl sat down among them, hesitantly reaching out, until one of the pups crawled into her lap. The girl's tentative smile reminded Emily so much of herself a year ago that her heart ached. Jack joined her, kneeling beside her wheelchair. "You did good, kid," he said softly, nodding at the scene. "Look at all this. You turned something terrible into something beautiful." Emily leaned against his shoulder, Max's head on her knee. "We did it together," she said quietly. "All of us." Later that evening, as the party wound down and families began to head home, Emily found herself at the center of a group of new volunteers, sharing her story one more time. She spoke not as a victim, but as a survivor, a leader, and a friend. She talked about how family isn't always blood, how sometimes love comes from the most unexpected places, and how animals like Max could teach even grown-ups what real empathy looks like. When the guests were gone, Emily and Max returned to the quiet of the garden. The two sat side by side, the summer air buzzing with crickets and the scent of fresh-cut grass. Emily reached for a tennis ball and tossed it gently. Max chased it down, bringing it back with a triumphant grin, then leaped into her lap, sending both of them into a fit of giggles. From the porch, Jack and Linda watched them, arms around each other, their hearts full. In the darkness, the lights of the healing center glowed like beacons, each one a symbol of the hope, forgiveness, and new beginnings Emily and Max had given to so many. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Emily felt only gratitude for her family, for her friends, for the chance to take the pain of her past and build something lasting and good. For Max, whose loyalty had quite literally saved her life. And as she gazed up at the stars, Emily made herself a promise to always be brave, to keep reaching out a hand to those who felt lost, and to remember every day that true strength isn't the absence of pain. It's the willingness to move forward, to trust again, and to love, fiercely and without regret. In the garden's quiet, surrounded by laughter, memories, and hope, the legacy of one girl and her dog lived on. Proof that even the deepest wounds could heal, that pain could be transformed into purpose, and that every new day offered the chance to begin again.